Welcome, dear participants, to the second module of the second week. In the previous module, we had looked at haptics and its role in the workplace. We had looked at different types of handshakes, different types of greetings, as well as cultural variations. In today's module, we would discuss the role of haptics, particularly at the workplace. We would also analyze what is the significance of haptics in establishing appropriate and acceptable gender relationship in a multicultural setting. When we touch other persons, we find that the technological barriers are absolutely absent. We have to move close to a person and establish a touch. Therefore, this proximity sometimes may be questioned in the workplace. However, we find that in the workplace, touch is always related to a goal, or it is a part of a routine professional interaction, and this context makes this touch less threatening and sometimes an enabling aspect of interpersonal relationships also. Socially sanctioned polite touch behaviors help us to initiate interaction with others, help us to overcome our hesitations, and at the same time it shows us that we are included in our team and that we are respected by others. Sometimes we find that a single touch on the forearm tells us that our efforts are moving in the correct direction. However, particularly when we look at the role of touch in interpersonal skills, particularly within intercultural situations and in cross gender situations, we have to understand that the said and unsaid boundaries are important and they have to be kept intact. In any type of friendship or in any type of office environment, too much touch can also create certain doubts in the minds of the people, and at the same time an absence of touch can also signal an aloofness which is not conducive to a work atmosphere. Human touch always intensifies experiences. When another person touches us in a professional setting, it validates a positive feeling in most of the situations. However, as we have commented in our previous module also, the cultural as well as institutional practices are significant, and these differences should be understood by the interactants. We have discussed two different types of cultures, which are the contact culture as well as the non-contact culture. A contact culture is one whereas it is considered to be normal to touch other people. It is considered to be normal to move closer to other people while communicating, and at the same time to have a more direct eye contact while touching other people. People in such cultures, for example, people in the Middle East or in the Mediterranean region of Europe, are comfortable with high levels of sensory inputs from touch or also from smell. In comparison to that, in the non-contact culture, for example, people in the Northern Europe as well as in many Asian countries, there is a tendency to touch less often. There is a tendency to stand further apart, and in most of our communication, we try to rely on visual communication. There are several societal practices in non-contact cultures which allow us to greet other people without having a physical contact with others. These differences alert us to this idea that touching other human beings in a workplace is a fuzzy as well as a complex area. And in this area, interpretation has to be contextualized. These contexts may be individual, they may be cultural, as well as they may be institutional. For example, many institutions prefer a no-touch norm where employees are alerted to this idea that they should not normally touch another human being, and even a polite handshake is considered to be enough. When used properly, human touch can corroborate a positive feeling, an assertive association amongst the colleagues, On the other hand, when it is used in a negative sense, it can break the trust and cause difficulties. These cultural differences of contact and non-contact cultures and environments condition our responses when other people touch us. Whether or not somebody would be offended by our touch depends on so many factors simultaneously. It depends on individual psyche, it depends on the immediate context within which the touch is being offered, and at the same time it also depends on the cultural conditioning of an employee. For example, the French and the Italian people are comfortable if somebody else touches them during the dialogue. They feel comfortable about this idea. Whereas people in the Britain feel very uncomfortable if somebody touches them in public. And this touch is absolutely avoided except perhaps on the sports field, and that too in front of a large audience. Cultures in which a touch is easily more accepted are considered to be the Indian society, the societies in Turkey, France, Italy, Greece, Spain, the Middle East, parts of Asia as well as Russia. However, whereas in Russia people are comfortable as far as physical touch is concerned, people of other far eastern countries have a different cultural mindset. Cultures where touch is not encouraged include several Asian and European countries, including Germany, Japan, England, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Estonia, Portugal, Northern Europe, and Scandinavia. There are certain other cultures in which, because of the gradual social changes towards a westernized education pattern, norms about touching others are also changing gradually. Our understanding of contact and non-contact cultures tells us that in comparison to Eastern countries and Eastern cultures, touching is relatively scarce in the Western cultures. And the scarcity of public touch makes this touch much more significant whenever it occurs. In a non-contact culture, if a manager gives a pat on the shoulder of a subordinate employee, for the employee it is an encouragement which would always be remembered. However, within the same broad cultural umbrella, we find that variations may exist. We can take the example of Europe, and we find that even within European culture, these cultural variations do exist. We have already looked at the situation of the British people who do not prefer touch, and we find that in the British corporate setting, very small amount of touch is permissible. In the British society, touch is permissible only at the sporting events and in celebration of victory or success, such as scoring a goal or a point, and in these situations touching among athletes is permitted. However, in the dressing room, it is still normally a hands-off policy. Alan Pease has commented that intimate embracing by British, Australian and New Zealand sportsperson has been copied from the sportspersons of South American and continental countries. In these countries, sportsmen often embrace and kiss each other after a goal has been scored, and they continue this intimate behavior even in the dressing room. We have commented on the behavior which is normally acceptable in France as well as in Italy. Similarly, we find that in Latin American countries, it is common for men to hug each other or grab the arm of a friend or place their hand on the shoulder of a friend during their communication. Similarly, we find that in Spain, we may notice men clasping each other's arm or placing a hand on another person's shoulder during conversations and during semi-official dialogues. In the same way, we find that in Middle East, in Latin American countries and in Southern European countries also, a lot more physical contact during normal conversations is perfectly permissible. Sometimes it may generate confusions among people in cross-cultural situations. For example, if an Englishman who is not aware of these cultural differences has to interact with a Latin American colleague or a teammate, then the Englishman may feel very uncomfortable by the level of touch the Latin American friend can initiate at his end. He may find it rude or disturbing or even threatening at moments. Similarly, the Latin American friend may feel the absence of touch by the British as somewhat cold or unfriendly or unconcerned or an example of a smug attitude. The presence or absence of touch, the extent to which it is acceptable in a society, depends on various sociological and cultural developments. We find that in Northern Europe and Far East, cultures are relatively non contact to the extent that one may have to apologize even if we accidentally brush against somebody in these societies. How human touch can initiate international confusions can be understood by this interesting event, which made a headline in 2009 when America's First Lady Michelle Obama broke royal protocol on a visit to Britain and hugged the Queen. This hug, which was so much against the British norm of behavior, so much against the royal protocol, made the global headlines. So, we find that in various countries, it is not only the frequency of touch, but also the position of touch, the point of the body where a human touch has been exercised also matters a lot. For example, in the Arab world, it is comfortable for men to hold the hands of each other or to kiss them in public. A cross gender touch is absolutely prohibited. In Thailand and Laos, it is a taboo to touch somebody on head, particularly the young children, because it is considered to be inauspicious. In South Korea, elders can touch younger people, particularly when they are trying to get through a crowd, etc. However, it is considered to be very rude if a younger person touches an elderly person in the same manner. These cultural differences are also exhibited in international situations. We have referred to the global headline when the US First Lady Michelle Obama hugged the Queen. The similar situation is exhibited in this photograph where the Pakistani president Mr. Asif Zardari is holding hands with the Iranian president Mr. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. It is understood as a sign of mutual respect because this is a commonly shared cultural belief. However, one cannot expect the same reaction in an American or a British society. So, these cultural differences do exist and they mainly exist in relation to territorial space, eye contact, the frequency of touch as well as the insulting gestures which are different in different societies. In most of the Western world, we find that some type of a touch has become permissible now, particularly the handshake. However, we find that there are still certain traditional pockets in certain societies and cultures where this is still avoided. It is interesting to refer to the Japanese and the Chinese societies. Various authors who have worked in the area of non-verbal aspects of communication have referred to these societal norms. The Japanese in general are considered to be opposed to the touch of a stranger, and bodily contact with a stranger is considered to be impolite in the Japanese culture, and therefore they avoid kisses, the bear hugs as well as even intimate handshakes with others. Their culture allows them to bow to each other, and the person with the higher status bows the least and the one with the least status bows the most. The same cultural norms are witnessed in the Chinese societies also. Chinese also do not like to be touched by the strangers, at least in the conventional Chinese social pockets. And introductions in the Chinese convention involve a nod or a slight bow. Touch is not welcome in the Chinese society, though we find that those business houses and those work areas where the Chinese and Japanese people have to interact with the Western culture, there is a closeness and a proximity as far as the display of body linguistic norms are concerned. So, these rules basically reflect the conventional makeup of Chinese and Japanese societies. This video interestingly reflects the use of touch in the office space.
In business, touch is the quickest way to establish personal rapport. A study on handshakes found that people are twice as likely to remember you if you shake hands with them.
At this point, I would like to refer to a very interesting article by Simone Bonner. Simone Bonner has written her article with the title The Haptic Experience of Culture. And I quote from this article, "The essential haptic experience in our daily encounters constitutes a cultural principle, a basic quality or element influencing the customary processes of cognition and behavior." In the course of her argument, she has quoted from a particular sports event. When Indiana University had won the 1981 Mid-East Regional Championship and it was shown on the TV to a live audience, the audience witnessed that each player had ritualistically cut a piece of the basketball net and proudly clutched this symbol of victory. In our idea, the haptic experience is not only related with the way we touch each other, but by extension, it is also associated with the objects whom we touch and the sense of touch which is communicated in our association with inanimate objects. And she has commented that the significance of this traditional right is based on the subjective power of the haptic experience and the symbolic potency of the visible tactile artifact in behavior. She has summed up the significance of the tactile artifacts in our day-to-day behaviors. She has also commented on the reliance on haptic reality, which has seeped into our vocabulary and in different aspects of our linguistic usages. It is interesting to note how so many idioms are based on the wider area of haptics. For example, we hold on to an idea, we handle a problem, we put a finger on something, we tend to touch all bases, we try our hand maybe at new recipes. In the opinion of Simone Bonner, these tactile metaphors suggest a certain level of truth and a clarity of perception. We may not believe everything we may hear, but we realize that hand in use is father of learning. If we have actually touched something or we have experienced something with our hands, then this becomes a significant interpretation of the scenario in comparison to various versions which we might have heard from others. In almost every language of the world, we find that the idioms are based on our haptic association with the day-to-day life. And a very interesting example can be found in the way we react to different stressful situations. When faced with stressful situations, we wring our hands, we nervously ply objects. When we will look at the language of the fingertips, then these aspects of our haptic behavior would be discussed once again. So, haptic symbols have significant meanings in the world of experience. Human touch is important in every circumstances. It is equally important in our professional settings, but it should come with certain moderators and we should be aware of certain filters before either extending our touch to other human beings or before looking at a particular interpretation of the touch of another human being. We have referred to the position of touch and how it can have different cultural variations. In the USA and in Northern Europe, touch also has a lot to do with the status and the status related hierarchies. People who are older or of higher status can comfortably touch a person who is younger or lower in status, but a younger person or a person who is lower in status would never initiate this touch. So, the president of the company may touch the office employees, but the employees would never touch the president. Equals may touch each other within the justifiable socially acceptable touch behavior. We have also looked at the cultural differences, the differences which exist in different organizations. A particular area which I want to touch upon is related with gender differences as far as our understanding of haptics is concerned. I refer to an interesting article by Brenda Major. This article was published in 2012 and the title is Gender Patterns in Touching Behavior. However, the findings of Brenda Major are valid even in today's situation. She has suggested that several consistent patterns of gender differences emerge from research on tactile communication. She has also suggested that since their early childhood, it is the young female child who is touched more in comparison to a male child. And at the same time, because of the social norms, men normally initiate touch more frequently than women. Gender differences in touching behavior are also closely linked to the social stereotypes which exist in most of the societies about prefixed gender roles. These gender roles and these stereotypes expect that women should be passive, they should be dependent, emotional, whereas men are expected to be active and independent, unemotional, and even aggressive in their day-to-day behavior. These stereotypes are widely held not only by men but also interestingly by women, and both react towards others on the basis of these stereotypes. If our behavior is governed by these stereotypes, then it not only inhibits our performance, but it also makes us less receptive as far as the other people's positive intentions are concerned. So, it constricts not only my performance, but it also puts certain undue constraints on the performance of other team members also who may belong to different genders. As far as social stereotypes are concerned, male roles are associated with proactive behavior, whereas women are normally associated with reactive behaviors. This dichotomy is similar to other distinctions which have been made between the behavior patterns of men and women. For example, agency versus communion, instrumental versus expressive, status asserting versus status neutralizing. Whereas in all these dyads, we find that men have been given the role of being an active agency, whereas women are supposed to be associated with passivity and less agency. So, gender stereotypes about touch leave women of higher status in a dilemma. It is only recent that women have started to wield positions of authority at a much higher level. They do not have any role models from whom they can learn skills in body language. So, they are often unsure whether their touch to their junior male employees may be interpreted as an indication of power and support, or it may be misconstrued as an indication of either weakness or even of flirtatious attitudes. The idea whether a touch is appropriate or not is very interestingly displayed in this video.
Try increasing your communication impact by adding a touch now and again. But remember to use your common sense about proper behavior in a professional setting. Here are a few things to keep in mind. Make the touch light and short, only long enough to establish a positive nonverbal signal. Limit contact to the hands, arms, shoulder, and back. And be aware that touching bare shoulders or backs, which female summer attire may expose, can be perceived as a personal rather than a business gesture. Try touching someone when requesting assistance. Can you get me that report? Research shows that a touch as short as 1/40th of a second will increase that other person's willingness to help. It's called the compliance effect. Lastly, use touching as a communication technique. For example, touch the listener on the forearm to add emphasis to key parts of what you're saying. Because touch is used most often when we believe strongly in what we're saying, touching can subconsciously enhance your credibility. Start paying attention to the amount of touching that's acceptable in your organization's culture. Notice who the touchers are and the positive or negative responses they.
On the basis of this discussion, we can easily make out that haptics is pretty significant in the workplace. Examining touch in a workplace is challenging, as touch is a complex as well as fuzzy aspect related with our communication. In any interpretation of touch, context is critically important, and the workplace is a somewhat unique setting for tactile interaction because of harassment concerns which have caused many managers to fear any type of touch with their subordinates. This climate of fear has forced many organizations to prohibit the use of touch in the workplace. We know that there are certain types of touches which can be used appropriately in the workplace. For example, an encouraging pat on the back, a handshake, but at the same time there may be an unwanted touch or a touch which is deliberately intimidating, which is not only unprofessional but can also be criminal. At the same time, researches in this area tell us that both these interpretations are equally applicable and available. Researchers suggest that touch may be used to positive outcomes in the workplace. This is particularly supported by a very interesting study which was done by Fuller and others, and this study had supported the notion that managers may use touch to influence the perceptions of employees. In the findings, they had suggested that managers who use touch as a strategy more frequently were more socially effective in terms of subordinates' perceptions of their likability, apparent sincerity, interpersonal influence, and perceptions of supervisor support. At the same time, there have been many other instances supported by research and documented by various agencies in which touch has led to a negative impact on the employees. Nowadays, we find that touch is not only related to human beings only, it has got a technological extension also. And utility of the term haptics now lies more in scientific, psychological and engineering concerns about embodied tactile or somatic perceptions. A very interesting article by Mandayam Srinivasan has referred to wide varieties of applications which have emerged to span many areas of human needs, which include product design, medical trainers and rehabilitation. He has also referred to 3 different types of haptics. The term haptics is deployed in various contexts, for example, in art history, in aesthetics and architecture, and more frequently in the psychology of perception and engineering, in man management, in human resources. But now we find that the increasingly multidisciplinary research has made it possible to look at this particular art of touching in its technological dimensions. So, he has subdivided haptics into 3 subcategories: human haptics, machine haptics and computer haptics. Human haptics is what we have been discussing in the last 2 modules. The study of human sensing and, if I can use this word, manipulation of their ideas and emotions through touch. Machine haptics is the design, construction and use of machines either to replace or to augment human touch. Artificial intelligence is working in this direction. Then we have computer haptics, which is based on algorithms and softwares associated with generating and rendering the touch and feel of virtual objects. So, this discussion of haptics tells us of its significance in the workplace, in our personal life also, the cultural variations which exist in its interpretation, as well as certain other dimensions which have become possible because of technological development. In our next module, we would look at kinesics as an independent part of non-verbal aspects of communication. Thank you.